General, I got a message from you. We're a bit upset at Trump's move to withdraw 5,000 US troops from Germany. And that's in retaliation to Merz saying that Iran has humiliated the US. So withdrawal will happen over the next 6 to 12 months. One brigade combat team and a long-range fires battalion will be reassigned. Some troops returning to the US, others deployed to the Indo-Pacific. The US currently has 6,000 active duty troops in Germany, second only to Japan in foreign deployment numbers. The Ramstein Air Base is the hub for US operations across Europe and Africa. The move follows Merz saying the US has, quote, no strategy on Iran and is, quote, being humiliated by Iran negotiators. Trump fired back on Truth Social, calling Merz interfering with those getting rid of the Iran nuclear threat. Trump previously floated the same move at the end of his first term. Biden canceled it. This is much bigger than 5,000 troops. It's the first major structural pullback from a NATO posture that has held since World War II. And it's being executed not because of military strategy, but because Trump is publicly punishing an ally for criticizing him during war. Whether allies treat this as a wake-up call or confirmation that the alliance is already fraying, the deterrent calculus in Europe just changed overnight. Russia's watching closely. So that's a bit of a summary of what's happening. Would love to get maybe give us a deep dive of what that means, how many troops the US has in Germany, what's the purpose of them being there, how significant is it, as much details, as much as you know about it. It'd be good to educate me and the audience.
Okay, so I need to give a bottom line up front. This knee-jerk reaction by the president based on Merz's comments about the situation in Iran, it's literally, using a football or soccer analogy, this is like an own goal. It's like the United States, we scored against ourselves. And why do I say that? Those troops are not there for Germany. They are there as a forward operating base for the United States. Landstuhl specifically is where these troops are. They're stationed in and around Landstuhl, Germany. Landstuhl is also the site of the largest American hospital outside of the United States, military hospital. We use it all the time for any kind of conflicts in terms of being able to evacuate wounded soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. So it is essential that we have that as a staging base, both for moving forces forward, as well as, of course, for getting people out. It's very difficult to travel halfway around the globe without some capability to land and stabilize patients. So I could go on and on. There are about 68,000 American military stationed in Europe. Of those 68,000, approximately 36,000 are located in Germany. Now, this 5,000, this idea of, a round even number of 5,000, it's not quite 5,000 because apparently they've included one battalion that was going to be deployed, but yet is not yet there. So the net impact is probably only a reduction of about 3,500 over the next 6 to 12 months. So I'll just pause for a second, just kind of giving you the lay of the land. But this is not for Germany. This is for the United States. We need to have those people forward deployed to make them more combat ready whenever we move them wherever we want to the Middle East, or heaven forbid, against Russia if needed.
Can you elaborate further when you say it's a forward operating base, what that means, and for which regions would it be used for? Some people think it's only about Russia, but it's more than that.
Oh, yes. Good point. So the idea is that if you take troops from the United States and move them right into a combat zone, it's going to take probably about 12 hours of transport, plus perhaps multiple stops at bases where apparently the president keeps criticizing the Spanish, the Italians, and the Germans nonstop. We need those bases in order to be able to move our forces forward. You can imagine, just think about it. If you're traveling from the US to the Middle East or vice versa, and you're not going to exactly arrive ready to go into combat or ready to go to business meetings or whatever. You need time to recuperate. That is one of the important ideas of having a forwardly deployed base where our troops can catch up. They can have a few days of rest to be able to prepare to move into a combat zone. Also, Germany at Grafenwehr has the largest training area that the United States has funded since World War II that allows our troops to hone their combat skills before they go into combat. Without these forward operating bases, they are moving from bases in the United States almost directly into combat, which is never a good plan. You want to have bases to forward stage, to have rest, to be able to train, and then to deploy from there, let alone the idea, of course, that it's the largest military hospital we have outside the United States.
All right, so a lot of people look at these American bases in other countries, and their first reaction would be, this is the US defending other countries. But what you're explaining right now is maybe that has a role, but that's not the main reason the US has those bases. This is to enforce US foreign policy across the world, to be able to react very quickly to any things like the Iran war, to be able to respond quickly. If the US did not have these forward operating bases, the time it would have taken to conduct that military buildup around Iran, first would have been taken much longer. But one can argue, the operation against Iran would not have even been possible if not for the bases that the US has had in the region. Is that accurate?
That's an absolutely fair statement. Without the bases in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, and in the Middle East, and in other parts of the world, we could not make this happen. You just can't. It's just not like saying, I want to call United Airlines or American Airlines or British Air or whatever and say, I'd like to fly to here and be ready. That is not how it works. It's extremely complex. It's logistically heavy and logistically dependent. Now, I don't want to be completely altruistic. The secondary objective that does happen is that because our American military are there, that means they are also there to help protect that nation. But let's be absolutely perfectly clear. They are not there with the first objective to protect that country. They are there as a forward operating base for power extension of the military. That's the primary role. The fact they're sitting there, well, that benefits the local community, but that is not something that's the primary objective in any sense of the word.
Do you know why Germany is the host of the largest US base?
Yes.
Does it make, okay, please explain.
Yes. Yeah, the reason is because of all the nations in Europe, the number one location at the end of World War II, where we had the largest number of forces, numbering almost 350,000 men that stayed after the war. I mean, after the war, we had 350,000 American military in Germany occupying it. Then, of course, over the decades since 1945, that number has continually come down, such that from 35,000 in Germany, from 350,000 in Germany to now only 36,000, 1/10 the number of soldiers we had after the end of World War II. So it's because we had the infrastructure, we had built barracks, we had built military housing. In fact, my father was deployed to Germany in 1962, and we were not allowed to come with him at the time because the tensions with the Soviets were so bad. Only in later on in 1963 were we able to join him. And so I lived in Germany as a child on a military base, again, U.S. military housing in Germany, with literally hundreds of thousands of other Americans. So this is something that is it's something that has grown from World War II. It is nothing new. It is literally since 1945.
And those troops are moving, I think they're being deployed to the Indo-Pacific, from what I understand. There's some talks about moving them more eastwards towards Russia. Is there an argument to be made that moving troops out of Germany to the Indo-Pacific could actually strategically make more sense, because the biggest threat right now is China and not Russia? Is that maybe a shift of the strategy, the US strategy, of how they perceive Russia?
So where those troops go, whether they go to Indo-Pacific, whether they come to the United States, I don't know. But you have to understand, again, all your viewers have to understand, this is a knee-jerk reaction from the president whose ego was bruised by Merz basically saying, hey, Iran is basically making a fool of you, Mr. President, which
So that's
they
what
are,
concerns
by the
you.
way.
So it's not the redeployment of the troops that happens all the time. What's really concerning you is the reason behind it and the timing of it.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. In the same way that the president attacked Iran, he's pulling 5,000 troops out of Europe, Germany, for reasons, no other reasons other than literally the Hertz pissed him off. That's it. There's no logic. There's no military strategy. It is just, it's a continuation of incompetence of the administration.
Why don't people like General Kane oppose him or try to oppose? Maybe they are. We don't know. And how do you think the US military will be responding to such developments? Again, not the development themselves, but to find out that troops are being redeployed from Germany because of comments made. And they're pretty mild comments, to be honest, but comments made by the leader of Germany, the Chancellor of Germany.
Remember that this president has a very, very thin skin. Things get underneath him very, very easily. And so, in answering your question about the military, obviously, I do not know what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is thinking about this. It's not an illegal order. It doesn't make any sense, but yet it's not illegal. So, of course, I'm sure he's going to go through with it. He might advise the president, but quite frankly, the president does not take the advice from people or advice that he does not agree with. And that's been proven over and over and over again. So in this particular case, I would hope that the chairman is advising the president as he should, as the senior military leader of our country. At the same time, whether or not the president is open to it or receptive to it is extremely doubtful.
That is, if this is the real reason, like I'm trying to think what other reasons there could be, but he made it clear this is the reason, I think, in his Truth Social post. But if that's the reason, what does that say about the president? Because I was talking about you in one of my interviews, and I said, like, in the last interview we did, you were first time I see you really upset and bothered, and you were bothered by all the firings by Hexeth and what's happening within the US military. Can you just explain a bit more when you're thinking about this, when you're reading the news, what worries you the most?
So the thing that I want all the people listening to this to understand, what I am distressed about is that our national security policy and our military, their national security policy and strategy, it's all over the map, and it's based on literally the ego and the midnight 4 a.m. tweetings of the president. And again, people around the world who react to him in any way, either praising him or, quite frankly, saying, hey, Iran has made a fool out of you. He is dealing with this in a knee-jerk reaction, and he is wasting taxpayer money, moving forces around the globe. These are people, these are American citizens and their families that are actually impacted. So whatever plans they might have had in terms of the family being there, the schooling for the kids, that's going to be jerked up, and they're going to be, who knows where they're going to go next.
Just because he was upset by comments by another leader.
That's exactly right. He's impacting the lives of 5,000 military and who knows however many dependents. I mean, it could probably be 15 to 25,000 dependents. Their lives are now in chaos and uncertainty because the president has a knee-jerk reaction. He doesn't think things through of the unintended consequences.
Talking about unintended consequences, there's another development as well that happened, that people are being distracted by Iran. Zelensky has quietly accepted something. Trump isn't becoming Biden. After a year of trying to win over Washington, Ukraine's president is now building around the US. Around the US, as in without the US. He proposed a new security alliance, EU, UK, Ukraine, Turkey, Norway, explicitly designed for a world where the US steps back from NATO. His pitch: without Ukraine and Turkey, Europe cannot match Russia's military by 2030. With them, it can control the seas, the skies, and the land. Turkey is the wild card. Ankara gains enormous leverage from being needed by both Ukraine and the EU simultaneously. Zelensky is no longer asking permission. Is Europe ready to lead? So essentially, Ukraine is I think Zelensky has called for a meeting and for an alliance that excludes the US, that relates to the war in Russia and goes beyond that as well, where Europe takes care of their own security. And the way this is being framed is that Zelensky's been trying to convince Trump the importance of supporting Ukraine and in the war against Russia, the importance of NATO. But what's happened since is the US has pulled out the aid from Ukraine. Everything, all the aid that's going to Ukraine right now, which if you compare it to the amount of munitions that were used in Iran, it's light and day. Iran in a month, they've used more than Ukraine has used in the entire war. But all the munitions, all the weapons and munitions that are being sent to Ukraine right now from the US are actually being purchased from Europe too. So to some extent, the US has to some extent pulled out. They're offering still intelligence and support, I think logistics support as well. But that's about it from what I understand. How closely are you following this? What do you think of
yes. So I think I have to, well, I'm a super fan of the strategic thought that the Ukrainian president has given since his country was attacked. This guy thinks short game, medium game, long game. He plays all the cards to be able to ensure that his country survives. And I will tell you that is the kind of leader that a nation needs. Someone who will stand up for his people. I am just extremely impressed with this guy. And every Ukrainian should be impressed as well. Now, the fact that he is trying to propose a way that is no longer dependent upon the US because he can no longer, correction, these are my words, not the Ukrainian president. My words are he cannot trust Trump because at a moment's notice, Trump could cancel or change something on a tweet, literally. So the fact that he's trying to create this alliance with Turkey, with some of the Arab countries, with Germany, because remember, Germany is in an economic powerhouse. They have increased their defense spending considerably compared to everyone else in Europe. And I know that scares the crap out of the French, because we know the hundreds of years of conflict between the French and the Germans. I get it. However, at the same time, Europe needs to stand on its own because it can no longer rely on the United States. So I think it's very, very strategically smart of the Ukrainian president.
Why? What is their production capacity? Why are they still buying weapons from the US? Is Europe really that behind that all the weapons they're buying for Ukraine is coming, most of it is coming from the US? How long would it take for Europe to be able to catch up to the US in being able to develop such weapons?
Okay, that was a lot, because on one side, you need simple things like 155 millimeter rounds. Like that's one thing that you need for artillery pieces. But on the other extreme, you need drones and you need ballistic missiles and I'm sorry, not ballistic, excuse me. You need missiles that can strike deep, not ballistic. My mistake.
Long range, yeah.
Long range missiles. So in general terms, I would probably estimate that it would take the Europeans between 2 and 3 years to up their production on certain weapon systems to be somewhat self-sufficient. Notice what I said, somewhat self-sufficient. Remember that NATO uses F-16s, and that means that most of those parts are coming from the United States. So there still has to be some kind of economic relationship between the U.S. and NATO countries. So it's not correct at all for anyone to think that Europe can be completely independent in 3 years. They cannot. At the same time, they can make huge strides in the next 2 or 3 years to be more independent.
There's one thing I want to ask you about. We haven't had a chance to speak about it. Have you seen the information about the Dark Eagle, which is the hypersonic missile that was being deployed? 18 of them were being deployed. We haven't spoken about this yet, have we?
Well, we mentioned it, I think on Friday, I believe. But remember, we were talking about the idea that it's probably not yet. The point is, why would we deploy our latest weapon against, no offense, a third-rate nation? And why would we not save that for a first-tier adversary?
But apparently it's been, but since we had that conversation, apparently it's been confirmed, the deployment of them by more sources.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I have so many questions. Just for the audience, for anyone that wasn't listening to us before. So this is a hypersonic missile. The US, for some reason that I still don't understand, this is the discussion we had, doesn't have significant hypersonic missiles. And I looked at the production capacity of the US to develop hypersonic missiles. They can only do just over one a month, according to the current capacity. Whereas in China, they could do probably less capable ones, but they could do hundreds a year. And Russia, they could do, I think, about a dozen a month, about 10 times more. I don't remember the exact numbers. And the cost of Russia and China to develop these missiles was less than the US. So they already have, and they've had them for years, they already have hypersonic missiles. I'm not sure about the capabilities versus the American ones, versus the Dark Eagle one. But the thing that really surprises me, General, is why did it take so long for the US to build hypersonic missiles? Why is the capacity to develop many of them is still not there for the world's biggest military, considering the spending the US has on their own military?
So, like many things, and this is something we also were chatting about in an earlier podcast, is I absolutely do believe in the need to shake up the hierarchy in the Pentagon periodically, because you need new thinking, you need innovative thinking, you need reframing of what does good or great look like. I do not know all the details, and it's very important for me to say this. I do believe, though, that in the same way that we lag behind some countries on drone technology, some countries, the reality is that we need to look at new weapon systems, new capabilities, reframe our thinking, not just churn out the old school type of mentality and the old school production lines based on the existing contracts. So I believe
I've got the numbers for you just quickly. The Dark Eagle costs $40 million a unit, and they can develop 1 to 2 a month. It's expensive, low volume, high precision boost glide system. The Russian one, they've got one that costs 4 to 10 million. Another one costs 5 to 6 million. Much cheaper production, in the dozens per year per type. So the Zircon, they're making about 80 per year. They're planning to make. China has 2 versions, and they cost about 10 to 20 million. So about half to a fourth to a quarter of the American one. Far lower cost. Some of them are experimental. Export hypersonic, $100,000. High production capacity, hundreds per year across types for mass saturation. So this is what I'd love you to get your comments on this. That's the information we have.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example of where the Pentagon was not thinking longer term, and we're not moving as rapidly as our adversaries have been. Again, whether it is in these hypersonic missiles, or of course, as I keep on going back to drones, while we certainly made huge strides, we have fallen behind some other nations like China that are producing them more rapidly and more sophisticated and in greater numbers. That's also, by the way, why getting an aircraft carrier anywhere near Taiwan is going to be extremely dangerous, because they will fire 100 hypersonic missiles at that one carrier. And for a fraction of the carrier, that carrier will not be able to fend off all of those missiles at all. We can't do it. So bottom line is, we're behind. We're behind.
That is pretty concerning. And then that's not including the munition stockpiles being depleted so much. How do allies look at the US now? They've seen, I think we've talked about it. Again, I can't remember because there's so much going on, about the destruction in the American bases. Have we talked about the CNN report?
No, we had not talked about that yet. No.
Oh, okay. There was a CNN report of the bases in the region. You've seen it? The amount of destruction they've gone through. One of them had 6 radars, very expensive radars. 5 of them were destroyed. Some of them were rendered uninhabitable. They cannot be used whatsoever. Some of these bases. Right. Inoperable. There you go. Sorry. Inoperable. So that was a report came in by CNN. We had similar reports by CBS and one more. I can't remember who it was, that came with similar reports. And before that, the New York Times was the first one to break the story about the amount of damage, the extent of the damage. So the CNN report also said that Gulf countries are looking at US bases as no longer, they don't see them as impenetrable anymore. Impregnable. I think it was impenetrable. Can't pronounce it. So they don't have that same image of, not being completely defended, the image that they had before the Iran war. And now they see that they need to diversify as well from just having US bases, according
Yes.
to the CNN report. And I said the advisor to the president of the UAE said the same thing to me as well. So if you put this together, the developments in when it comes to the US bases and the amount of damage they sustained, the outcome of the war in Iran, the fact that the outcome, but also the fact that Trump decided to go into this war without seeking the advice or the opinion of allies or the direction of his allies at the detriment of American allies. And then you see the president reacting as he did now to the comments by Merz. And we've seen similar instances before. How much damage is that alliance facing? Is the US NATO alliance, US Asian alliance facing, and what would be the consequences of this? Because I worry what will happen in 5 years' time is that things may go back to normal next year in 2-3 years, but Gulf countries, Asian countries as well, may start looking elsewhere for their own defense. That is the worry that I have.
So I don't think it's a worry. I think it's a fact. I think they're going to do it. I believe strongly that they see the weakness in the administration in terms of committing to partnerships and to relationships. They see it as being up and down. One minute you can be the president's best friend, and the next minute he is bad-mouthing you nonstop. And we've seen that across virtually all the leaders of Europe. And so the bottom line is they're saying, you know what? I can no longer rely on the United States either economically to buy their weapon systems, and I need to diversify for my own people, for the defense of my own oil fields, for the defense of my own nation. And therefore, either I'm going to buy it elsewhere or I'm going to go ahead and start making it myself. And I truly, truly believe in the next 3 years during this next 2 years in this administration, it's very likely we will see Chinese bases in the Middle East. So just mark that down. 2 years, within 2 years, they're going to say, sure, bring a couple hundred people over here to train our military on the use of your air defense system, which, by the way, would probably be a defensive system. Notice the way I'm saying it. These would not be Chinese soldiers going in to occupy. They would be trainers on defensive weapon systems, low level, not a threat to anyone else. I think it's going to happen within 2 years. And that's going to be the foothold the Chinese want.
There's no, I don't think there's any countries that have Chinese military bases right now. I think there's some African ones with very limited bases. But that will be a pretty significant shift in Chinese foreign policy.
Okay, so the way the Chinese do it is that they go in.
Djibouti. They have one in Djibouti and a small one in Cambodia, Tajikistan. That's it.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Okay, but here, the Chinese look at this differently. They look at it that they want to go in and say, for example, the Pacific Islands is the number one target for the Chinese. What they are doing is going in and saying, you know what, we're going to enhance your harbor. We're going to enhance your oil and gas storage facilities in your harbor. We're going to deepen it. We're going to make it so you can have more ships in here. We're going to lengthen or even build you an airfield. Well, remember that the Chinese are driven by economics, number one, not by the overseas deployment of military. However, you will find on many of these islands where the Chinese have invested, you're going to find 100, 200, 300 Chinese soldiers that are there helping to train local, everything from law enforcement to their quasi-military. So let's not be fooled. The Chinese are, number one, driven by economic means, but then number two, those air bases, those harbors, they can, and those railroads they're building, they can absolutely positively be used as forward operating bases for their military, the same way the Japanese did in the 1930s and then through World War II.
So you're saying a lot of the investments that the US is conducting, that China's conducting right now, it's part of their Belt and Road initiatives and other similar initiatives, though that infrastructure could become dual use infrastructure and could be repurposed for military use?
Absolutely correct. Yes, absolutely correct. Primary objective to stay low on the radar. It's to enhance the economic prosperity of the island or the area they're going to. Right underneath it, well, thank you very much, and we'd like to offer 100 of our a company of our Chinese soldiers to train you on whatever, just to forget the idea of an air defense system. That's too sophisticated. It could be something far more simple. Just we'd like to help train your military in small arms weapons, for example. And see, we're friendly, we're nice, we're going to help you to be more successful and safer as a result. And we'll be here as long as you want us. Absolutely, positively. That is happening right now.
These are long-term consequences of wars like what we're seeing now in Iran.
Yes.
That people just look at what happens right now, they think this is the end of it. The outcome of this war, and we've discussed this before, the outcome of this war in some ways will be unimaginable. In ways we don't know what the Gulf will do. We don't know how allies will respond. We don't know who the next leader in Germany, the next leader that replaces Macron, that saw what just happened with that US alliance. Because there's some things that we considered, non-negotiable, unquestionable. That's the US relationship with NATO, the alliance between the US and Europe, American military might, the way the US treats their allies in Asia. They would never start a war that would economically cripple their Asian allies. They would take that into consideration. So there were certain, beliefs that we operated under for so many years and decades, and these are being shaken very quickly in a very short period of time. So there could be decisions that are made now that we won't see the outcome of them till, the visit by the UAE to China by the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi.
Yes.
The meetings between Modi and Xi Jinping, and how Russia and China, the Ukraine war getting China and Russia closer, for example. So all these things will have consequences that will be felt later on. And what you're saying is one of these second and third order consequences could be China filling the void of where US bases could, either were or the US never had bases. And if the US, for example, decides to pull out of the Gulf, now Gulf countries will need to improve relationships with Iran, but they also need to ensure they have deterrence against possible Iranian aggression for whatever reason. Maybe new Iranian leader could be more aggressive, more hostile than Ali Khamenei, or maybe Mushtabah is more hostile. So in their own self-interest, these countries need deterrence, and the US alone either is not enough, or they might expect the US to pull out as part of a deal with Iran, or because of the debt that the US is facing. And one of the ways to replace that umbrella that the US has created is going to another country like China, as well as increasing their defense budget.
That's correct. So again, I want to make sure all the viewers understand this is not Chinese military bases. They are basically economic investments in the area that just happens to have the offer of some Chinese military to help train their own military in some fashion. However, in the Middle East, it could be after all the dust settles with this fiasco that's going on with the United States right now, if indeed other nations purchase Chinese weapons, defensive weapon systems, they're going to need Chinese military to help train them. And that's what I'm saying. I'm going to predict right now within 2 years, there's a high probability that could happen. Not the idea there would be 10,000 Chinese soldiers in the Middle East. I'm not advocating that. I'm not predicting that.
But that could happen 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
Well, it could.
Future generations.
Remember, the Chinese go the long game, and they're looking about building an economic relationship with nations such that, again, as I mentioned, we're going to help you with building your airfield or extending the runways or building a better base or helping them with more harbor facilities in some way. And then it's just so easy to use that dual purpose. The Americans typically go in and they say, we need a military base, and then we might help you otherwise economically. But we have this way of saying, we need a staging base in Spain, in Germany, in Italy, wherever. So it's a very different perspective the Chinese have, which again, long range, long-term investment.
By the way, the Iranians have responded to Trump. It just came out now. Let me read out the response here. Breaking: Iran has responded to the US's 9-point proposal with its own 14-point proposal. The US offered a 2-month ceasefire to work out the details, but Iran rejected it and instead listed the following requirements, according to Tasnim News, which is the Iranian media outlet. 1, ensuring non-aggression, fair. 2, withdrawing US military forces from Iran's periphery. There we go.
I'm not sure what
3,
that means, but
they kept it vague. One could assume that they're asking their
ports.
one extreme would be the removal of the entire of all the bases in the region eventually. Another one would be just the military buildup right on their border. So it's hard to determine what they mean there. Number 3, lifting the naval blockade. 4, releasing Iran's blocked assets. 5, paying compensation. We're back to square one. 6, lifting sanctions. 7, ending the war on all fronts, including Lebanon. And 8, establishing a new mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz. So we're back to square one. This is the exact same offer that they were making beforehand. There is nothing new.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I don't mean to laugh. This is the Iranians putting everything on the table and basically saying, I mean, no, by the way, the US and Iran, no one has made any concessions in either direction at all. There's been zero. And we're back to square one after spending. Oh, by the way, you know that the number is now over $50 billion, confirmed over $50 billion. In addition to the American lives and wounded and the expenditure of so much of our military's might. And for what? We, the United States and the world, are far worse off than we were 2 months ago.
I'll have a question for you. So Iran did something yesterday, that I thought was a great concession. They said, you know what? We will negotiate our control of the Strait of Hormuz, which is a sticking point that Trump and the US and the world really doesn't want to see. We will concede. We are open to make concessions on that if the US is willing to discuss the sanctions. So we make concessions on our control of the Strait of Hormuz. You lift the sanctions because Iran needs money to rebuild after they've been damaged of hundreds of billions of dollars. And they said they are open to have these negotiations while the US maintains their blockade. Because before their request was, we will not do any negotiations unless the blockade is lifted. And Trump refused that.
I had not seen that report.
Yeah, Trump refused it today.
I think the important
I worry that the decision to continue the war may have been made unless Trump is playing really hardball. I don't know, but I was surprised when Trump could have really celebrated this and called it a win instead of refusing it.
By the way, I completely agree with you. I think this is something where, well, I'm hopeful there will not be another U.S. attack in the next week. I am hopeful, but I'm not convinced of that yet. Yes, the third aircraft, the USS Gerald Ford is on its way home. That's good. That means they'll be down to 2 carriers in the Gulf. Okay, that's okay. I thought they might have tried to strike while there were 3 carriers there, but apparently not. I think this president has this all or nothing mentality. Either you just give me everything I want, or I'm just going to destroy your civilization, because he doesn't seem to be willing to go step by step together. Without knowing the details of the Iranian offer, I think the idea of sitting down and talking, that's where we need to be going. We need to be going there. We need to sit down. We need to make some small victories for both sides now so we can get out of this mess. Oh, by the way, and one other important thing. You notice that the administration, and specifically the Secretary of Defense, had not offered up the scope without any detail, because we don't want to give away tactically what did the Iranians hit. We don't need to tell them that. But the banter from the SecDef was one of, hey, we're fine, we're good, nothing to see here, don't worry about it. Whereas the United States actually sustained substantial damage to our military bases. And why? Because we weren't able to protect them against the onslaught of drones and missiles. I mean, it's actually, I feel so sad and so embarrassed as a senior retired officer for what happened to our military in this particular conflict, and the lack of accountability of the Secretary of Defense to say, you know what, we screwed up and we're going to learn from this and we're going to get better. He keeps on saying anybody who doesn't say this is a complete victory is the enemy, as he said to the Democrats in Congress. It's shameful.
Why do you think the bases sustained so much damage, and did it surprise you when you saw that report?
Yes, it did surprise me. I would not have predicted that. If you had asked me, based on my unclassified readings of the level of damage, I would have said it would have been a quarter of what actually was reported. So wow. It greatly concerns me that I did not know how significant it was. And again, the U.S. was doing, whether it's a good bad job or whatever, they were not revealing the scope of the negative impact. Obviously, that would not help the administration, who was claiming that it was overwhelming superiority when we all know it was not. And again, it really does hurt me to see how much this has happened.
Is it true? Some people are saying actually CNN is saying some of the bases have become inoperable. Do you think that's true based on what you've seen in that report by CNN? And what does inoperable mean? Does that take too long to rebuild? What does it mean exactly?
Yeah, so I have not seen the details of that report, so I don't know. However, inoperable for airfields typically means that there's so many holes in the airfield or that the refueling capability was destroyed. I do not know if that happened. Inoperable in terms of a base, maybe the communications are gone, or maybe the idea of the power systems completely destroyed, or perhaps all comms have been destroyed. It could mean that the air defense systems that are there were overwhelmingly degraded or destroyed. It could mean any or all of those things. So I don't really know. But inoperable typically means you have to repair the runways. You have to get a way to have refueling capability at your airfield. You've got to fly in new countermeasures, weapon systems, defensive systems. You've got to restock the armaments that are there, and you've got to ensure that you're building, like that one place where there were so many Americans killed in Kuwait. You've got to ensure you're rapidly building overhead cover in sufficient quantity to make and structure to protect the Americans when they're under attack.
And the most difficult thing to replace, the most expensive thing to replace, is all the radars that Iran has targeted, and they were able to target. They had such precision coordinates when conducting these attacks, because of the Chinese satellite. Not sure if you saw the report. There was a Chinese satellite that they had access to, that gave them, kind of full visibility on all the American bases, and they had the ability to really precisely target what assets to strike in the Qatari gas field, or what assets to strike, or what radars to strike in the American bases. What do you say to the people? Go ahead.
So one thing, I just wanted to pause before you asked me that question. This war, this engagement with Iran, after the Trump administration is gone, it will be studied in the American military war colleges, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, as well as, of course, the National Defense War College in Washington. It will be studied as what were all of the strategic failures that led to tactical failures that resulted in this catastrophe for the United States. And I'm going to tell you, it is going to happen, because there are so many failures of decision-making that have the failure to be able to work with your allies, the failure to have somehow been working the whole of government with the State Department to get Americans out of the Middle East, the failure to be able to have forces sufficiently pushed forward for an attack, the failure they underestimated totally the ability of the Iranians to defend themselves and their ability to attack not only the United States forces, but to attack friendly, the fellow Arab state forces. That has never been done before. Gross underestimation of intelligence by the United States in terms of intent, as well as, of course, the tactical failures. This will go down as one of those examples in the War College. So many lessons learned about what not to do and what to do properly. And I'm going to tell you, it's going to happen, but not while this administration is there. They're going to label it a complete success, which is complete lies.
And General, last question I want to ask you, there's the argument, the debate right now on whether these bases are, a great way to project power and have got a lot of benefits, as we've discussed about the German base, versus a liability because they become sitting targets for countries like Iran. So which side of that argument do you sit on?
Okay, so I'm going to say two things, and they have to go together. One, we need forward operating bases in order to project power around the world. And number two, we must do a far, far better job of putting in defensive measures into those bases so that they can survive the attack by any nation anywhere, or sufficiently survive. And it proved that we were vulnerable. And that is a key lesson learned that we as a takeaway. So we need forward projection bases, and we also need them to be properly defended against the technologies of 2026 and beyond. That's what I would say to you and to your listeners.
General, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for jumping on a weekend.
Thank you, Mario. Take care.
All right, everyone. We've got Larry Johnson coming on in a few minutes. I'll be live again in 12 minutes to continue the same discussion about Trump pulling out the troops from Germany, as well as the response from Iran on Trump's proposal for peace, as well as some of the latest developments, especially the impact this is having on the economies in Asia. Pakistan is screwed right now, and some of the numbers when it comes to the economic impact this is having on Iran. But I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Randy. He sent me a message. He was really upset with it's not about the troops pulling out of the German base. It's about the reasons behind it. And just that reaction, that knee-jerk reaction, as he said, it gives you an insight of how Trump is making decisions. And when you're making decisions that would not only impact the world, impact humanity to control nuclear weapons, you'd want to see decisions that take time, that are not based on emotions, that are calculated. And especially when it comes to working with allies should have the flexibility and the freedom to criticize you and should not face consequences for that. Now, I would say this is a small number of troops that have been pulled out of Germany, so it's not that significant. But the concern is, so Randy's concern, the general's concern is that this indicates that more knee-jerk decisions could be taken. That's a very valid concern. A counterpoint to that would be, that's a insignificant step by Trump, a symbolic one. It could be political as well. While I don't think it was the right decision, it does not indicate that knee-jerk decisions will be taken for much bigger issues, things with much bigger consequences, like a war with Iran. So if the war with Iran was a knee-jerk decision, which might have been, even though it took months for that military build-up, that one, I think, should face a lot of scrutiny. And it's a lot more concerning to me. And what happens next will dictate whether Trump is acting on emotions or not, because Iran has given him an off-ramp. So it's up to him to take it. Anyway, guys, I'll see you in 10 minutes with Larry Johnson. Bye.